Hey everyone, Hobbysci here. I know it's been a while since I last posted a video. I've been pretty busy since then. One of the things that have happened is that I recently got engaged, so there's that. Anyways, today I wanted to talk about a couple of things regarding the tank. One, I want to give you guys an update on how the coral and fish are doing. Second, I want to talk a little bit about why I decided to quit the Triton method. And then third, I wanted to give you guys one piece of advice in terms of how I do things when it comes to coral and reef tank husbandry. Without further ado, let's get right into it. First things first, let's talk a little bit about the fish. My two clownfish refuse to live where I tell them to. They just kind of seem to gravitate towards this one back corner of the tank and just keep digging in the sand and creating a little hole for themselves. I just kind of given up on them for now, and I'm just going to let them be. My two tangs are, doing great. They're kind of my main algae grazers in the tank, and they do a pretty good job of picking on any hair algae or any macroalgae that kind of wants to tend to grow inside of the tank. There's a little bit of aggression between them, but both of them are pretty well established now, and so they don't have, they're easily able to confront each other without actually getting pretty violent. And lastly, I want to talk a little bit about my Bartlett Anthiases. One of them is turned into a male, and he kind of keeps all of the female anthiases kind of in check. They seem to all kind of, gravitate towards kind of like the cave systems, with the exception of one, which kind of likes to swim out on the side and will sometimes come back in the cave, but for the most part actually likes to be out and about. So that's a kind of an interesting transition with one of them having changed sexes. Oh, and then there's also my Melanaris wrasse, which is constantly just trying to kill any snails or hermit crabs that it might get a hold of. So my activity from snails and crabs is actually relatively low during the day because, the Melanaris is always trying to hunt them. And it's not until after like 6 p.m. when it actually goes to bed in the sand where I will see more activity for my snails and hermit crabs. As for coral, everything is actually doing really, really great. As you guys know, I keep a mixed reef tank, and so I have Softies, LPS, and SPS all in one system, which makes it a little bit tricky to make everything happy. But I've kind of found a pretty good balance in the last year or so, and everything seems to thrive really well. My Digis particularly are growing really, really fast. And every week or so, I'll see that there's some new growth on it, and the alkalinity and calcium consumption is actually quite high because of that. Some of my Acropora are not growing the fastest. I will say that this is probably mainly attributed to the fact that I run a ultra low nutrient system. My phosphate and nitrate is almost zero all the time. And it doesn't mean that there's no nitrate or phosphate or phosphorus in the system because I do feed pretty heavily, but it does inhibit some of the zooxanthellae growth, which is probably why a lot of my corals have that famous ULN pastel color where all of them are quite light and they don't have like a really bright dark color to them. And I'll talk a little bit more about that once I start talking about why I quit the Triton method. Otherwise, my Softies, any zoas or my toadstool leather are all growing really, really fast. I've been a little bit worried about chemical warfare maybe starting to become a thing, but I do run carbon in the tank, and I only switch it out, new carbon every 3 weeks or so, and I haven't really started seeing any negative effects that would be caused by chemical warfare. So crossing my fingers to hope that stays that way. A couple of other corals that are doing really great for me is the purple Stylo that I have. Back when I was traveling in China earlier this year, I was actually, when I kind of got stuck there, my tank was going unattended for about 3 to 4 weeks. And even though I did have monitoring through my Profilux 4, you can imagine being away from the tank for almost a month is going to have some negative effects, even though you do have someone who comes in on a weekly basis and take care of it. They just don't know necessarily your tank as well as you do. So that did have some detriment on my system, and it was kind of going in balance. And as a result, my stylo actually ended up receding quite a bit, and only there being a little bit of tissue left on it. Well, after another 4 months of me kind of taking care of the tank, the stylo has actually regained new tips, as well as kind of regained the old dead skeleton, which I actually didn't know that a stylo could do. But now it looks as good as ever. The color is really dark and bright, and I'm really happy with the growth that I've seen. Some other corals that are doing really great for me are my Micromusa or acans. I have them placed kind of in the lower end of my tank, right underneath the Monty Island. And as you can see, they've kind of grown quite a bit to the point where they're actually now starting to encroach on the Monties quite a bit. And during the day, you'll see that they'll send out a little, some sweepers, and they'll actually kind of touch that green Monty and kind of make that skin recede. I haven't decided whether or not I'm going to move them or just keep them there and let them, battle it out and just have the green Monty kind of grow around it. Hopefully, the acans won't grow too far up, just because at that point the light gets a little bit too bright for them. Around that Monty Island, you're kind of seeing like about 200 par, and so hopefully they won't want to grow that high up. Why did I quit the Triton method? Well, if you guys have been following this channel from the very beginning, about 2 years ago, I initially set up this whole tank with the mind of doing the Triton method. And to be honest, it worked really great for a really long time, especially in the beginning, where I didn't keep a lot of coral and only really had fish in there. And I ran the system without any lights in the display for about a good month or two. I let the Cato kind of get established, and it was growing really well in there. And even as I started introducing corals into the system, the tank was, keeping really clean. I didn't have any issues with nuisance algae, or I didn't even have a diatom bloom in the tank. And so the system actually kind of skipped the ugly phase that a lot of reef tanks will see. Well, after about a year, then I was kind of starting to run into some issues with the Triton method. And it's mainly, I would say the main reason is maybe because I didn't follow Triton method fully, which is, one is that you actually got to do ICP tests relatively frequently to check that your water parameters are in check. Just because you use the Triton method doesn't mean you'll be hitting sea level parameters perfectly. You'll actually have to dose chemicals here and there just to kind of get everything balanced based on ICP tests. Well, one of the things that I found doing all these different ICP tests was that there's quite a bit of inconsistency in different tests, and that's a whole different conversation altogether. But I started losing faith a little bit in the ICP test. So I thought what I was paying for was, I didn't really get my money's worth in the short sense. So, I kind of went through that road, and I was starting to see kind of like a downward spiral with my tank, which is that I wasn't doing ICP tests frequently enough. And the Triton method was, doing its thing, but it probably wasn't perfectly balanced. Another issue that I had with the Triton method was that the nutrient export for the Triton methods was actually kind of tricky for me. Not in that macroalgae is hard to grow, but it's almost, the problem is really that the macroalgae grows a little bit too well. And what I was seeing was that the nutrient export level would increase as the Cato surface area increases, which makes a lot of sense. So it was really difficult to keep nutrient level balanced in the tank. At some point, my Cato was huge, and my tank was basically reading 0 nutrients everywhere. And all of my corals were kind of starting to suffer from it, looking really, really pale, like even paler than what you would see in your regular ULN systems. And after that, I ended up having a dino outbreak. And I don't attribute the dino outbreak necessarily to refugium itself. It's more so the fact that I lost control of how nutrients was being exported from my system, and it just kind of snowballed, and I ended up getting dino, and one thing led to the next, and I almost crashed the tank. Luckily enough, I managed to beat the dino by doing some treatments that I found online. I don't recommend dosing anything weird. There is a treatment method which kind of reintroduces bacteria levels in the tank by carbon dosing and air bubbling, basically. In short, I did decide to cut the Triton method from my system, and instead I transitioned to Triton other methods. So what Triton other methods is that it's a very similar approach to the regular Triton method, with the exception that it contains less of the chemicals that are used to grow macroalgae. So I got rid of my Chaeto refugium and just started using Triton other methods. And with that, I started regulating my nutrients only with a skimmer and Nopox, which is a form of carbon dosing. And I found that with the dosers that I have, my GHL dosers, I was able to fine-tune the carbon dosing to a level where I was able to keep very, very constant parameters. And I'm actually really happy that I did, because now my tank has become a very offhand experience. I would say that I only really maintain this tank, with the exception of cleaning glass and changing out the filter floss. I actually don't do any other maintenance in, about 3 weeks, which is I do a water change every 3 weeks, and that's about it. And then every couple of months, I replenish my dosing containers, and I, fill up my KH director with liquid, and I, replace my carbon source, carbon media, or replace my recirculating scrubber. And so really on a weekly basis, all I do is clean the glass on my tank, which has been a huge difference. So throughout this whole quarantine period, mostly I just spend my time looking at the tank, which is a really, really nice experience. So if anyone else out there is trying to use the Triton method and are having some issues with it, maybe consider doing Triton other methods. I think it's a little bit more complicated, because carbon dosing is, I would say, a little bit more advanced of a topic than keeping a refugium. A refugium is the concept is pretty simple, where the algae just kind of pulls out all the nutrients. With carbon dosing, you're feeding bacteria, and bacteria are breaking it down, and you're trying to balance your bacteria population, stuff like that. You might want to do a little bit more reading on that. Anyways, that's my take on why I decided to quit the Triton method. The last thing I want to talk about is just one piece of advice that I want to give any reefers that are watching my videos. Over the last 2 years with this tank in particular, I've kind of noticed one thing, and it makes a lot of sense. You watch a lot of videos on YouTube of people doing this for maintenance or doing this for maintenance, and you can kind of get caught up in all the different things you can do in order to keep a stable system. And I'm not saying don't go out there and do what these other reefers are doing, but I will say that whenever you do any maintenance or make any change to your tank, do it slowly. Everybody knows, okay, don't do a lot of change to your tank fast. Don't switch nutrient export systems, don't switch your dosing systems all too fast, because that can kind of cause your tank to crash. Well, one thing people don't talk about enough is don't do too much maintenance at one time. Don't go and do a water change your carbon media, change your filter socks, change your your CO2 scrubber media and filter floss all in one day and scrub your glass. You know, you're doing all this maintenance in one day, and I'm sure there are plenty of people who do that and get away with it, but kind of what I found was that whenever I do any bit of maintenance, I only do one or two things at a time. If I'm going to wipe the glass down one day and then change the carbon source, my carbon filter one day, I won't touch the filter floss and I won't touch my CO2 scrubber media. So basically, you know, pace yourself through your maintenance and don't just do it all on Sunday. I know a lot of people have busy schedules, but try not to do everything in one day and be, you do like a powerhouse cleaning kind of thing. Just, one thing every day or one thing every other day. It actually feels like a lot less maintenance when you do that because you're only doing a little bit at one time. But overall, it's also just going to make your system a lot more stable. So that's my advice today, and I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys next time. Oh, one more thing before I go. This channel is actually close to reaching 1,000 subscribers, and just as a sign of gratitude for people watching, I kind of want to do a 1,000 subscriber giveaway. Kind of maybe leave me a comment if you have any thoughts on what that should be. Should it be a piece of equipment? Should it be some corals? Should it be a gift card to like BRS? Anyways, just, link me down below and let me know what you think, and I will include it in the next video. Anyways, thanks.